Ever wondered what fruits people in medieval times snacked on before apples and oranges took over the world? Turns out, our ancestors had a way more diverse diet than we do today, filled with exotic, now forgotten fruits that have practically vanished from modern grocery stores. Some of these fruits were once prized delicacies served at royal feasts, while others were everyday staples for peasants and travelers. From strange berry-like clusters to citrus relatives that don't even exist anymore, medieval people enjoyed a wild variety of flavors that would blow your mind. So grab your time-traveling fruit basket, because today we're diving into 25 forgotten fruits that were once a part of medieval life. By the end of this list, you might just wish some of these delicious relics would make a comeback. Let's get started. Medlar.
Medlar, comically known as open arse fruit, hails from southwestern Asia and Turkey. With a soft, squishy texture.
Ever heard of a fruit that needs to rot before you can eat it? Sounds weird, right? Well, back in medieval times, people loved it. It's called the medlar, and today, it's almost completely forgotten. But why? Let's dive into the bizarre history of this medieval delicacy. Imagine you're living in the Middle Ages. It's winter, and fresh fruit is scarce. But you have a stash of medlars, brown, wrinkly, and almost mushy. Instead of throwing them out, you grab one, scoop out the soft, jam-like flesh, and enjoy its sweet, spiced flavor. Sounds kinda cozy, doesn't it? Medlars were a big deal in medieval Europe. The fruit comes from a tree that thrives in cold climates, making it perfect for regions like England and France. Even the Romans loved them. But here's the catch. Medlars aren't edible when picked. They have to go through bledding, basically controlled rotting, before they turn soft and delicious. So why don't we eat them anymore? Well, medlars take patience. They don't fit into our fast food world. Plus, modern fruits like apples and pears are easier to grow and store. Over time, medlars just faded away. Sorbus. Imagine stepping into a medieval banquet hall, long wooden tables, the glow of candlelight, and the scent of roasted meats filling the air. But among the lavish spread, there's something you wouldn't recognize today. A small orange-red fruit with a bittersweet taste. This is sorbus, a fruit once prized in medieval times, but now almost completely forgotten. Sorbus, also known as rowan or service tree fruit, was a staple for centuries. Unlike the apples and pears we still eat today, sorbus had a unique flavor, bitter when fresh, but sweetened after the first frost. Our ancestors knew this and used it to make everything from fermented drinks to preserves. Back then, people didn't just eat for pleasure. Food was medicine. Sorbus was valued for its ability to aid digestion, prevent scurvy, and even treat infections. But as trade routes expanded and sweeter fruits became available, sorbus was slowly pushed aside. So why did we forget about it? Simply put, taste. It's an acquired one. But with the rise of foraging and interest in ancient foods, maybe it's time for a sorbus comeback. Would you try it? Mulberry. Did you know that there's a fruit we once cherished in medieval times, but barely talk about today? It's sweet, it's juicy, and it stained the hands of kings and peasants alike, the mulberry. But why did this medieval favorite fade into obscurity? Let's dive into history and uncover the forgotten tale of the mulberry. Back in the Middle Ages, mulberries weren't just a backyard snack, they were a staple. Monasteries and noble estates grew mulberry trees, and the fruit found its way into pies, jams, and even medicinal syrups. In Europe, especially in England and France, mulberries were seen as a delicacy, enjoyed fresh or fermented into wines and cordials. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Mulberry trees weren't just valued for their fruit's milk, production depended on them. The leaves of the white mulberry fed silkworms, making them an essential part of medieval economies. Rulers, including King James I of England, even encouraged mulberry plantations for silk production. So why did mulberries vanish from our tables? Unlike apples or cherries, mulberries are delicate and don't store well. With industrialization, more transport-friendly fruits took over. Today they grow wild, often ignored, except by those who remember their sweet, fleeting taste. Ever tasted a mulberry? Let us know in the comments. Maybe it's time to bring this medieval treat back. Barberry.
Hi, I'm Susan Weed. It's a beautiful, crisp fall afternoon here in the Catskill Mountains, and we're looking at some beauty berry.
Ever heard of barberry? No? Well, don't feel bad, most people haven't. But believe it or not, this tiny tart fruit was a staple in medieval kitchens. Yep, before cranberries stole the spotlight, barberries were the go-to ingredient for adding a sour punch to food. These little red berries grow on thorny shrubs and were once everywhere in Europe and the Middle East. Back in medieval times, cooks loved them for their sharp, citrusy taste, kind of like a mix between a sour cherry and a lemon. Medieval chefs used barberries in everything: stews, sauces, and even even roasted meats. Their acidity helped cut through fatty dishes, kind of like how we use vinegar or lemon juice today. Plus, they made a mean medieval jelly. But wait, it wasn't just about flavor. Barberries were medieval medicine. People believed they could help with digestion, liver problems, and even infections. They're packed with antioxidants and have antibacterial properties. Science now backs this up, so medieval folks were on to something. Sadly, barberries faded from European diets, partly because they were linked to crop diseases, but they never disappeared completely. In places like Iran, they're still a beloved ingredient, especially in rice dishes. So maybe it's time for a barberry comeback? So what do you think? Would you try this medieval superfruit? Let us know in the comments. Quince. Have you ever heard of quince? No? Well, you're not alone. This ancient fruit was a big deal in medieval times. Think of it as the missing link between apples and pears. But today, most people don't even know it exists. Let's dive into the fascinating story of quince and why it vanished from our diets. Back in the Middle Ages, quince was everywhere. People weren't just eating it raw because, fun fact, raw quince is super tough and sour. Instead, they turned it into jams, jellies, and even fancy medieval desserts. Ever heard of marmalade? Yep, that was originally made from quince, not oranges. So why don't we eat quince anymore? Well, a few reasons. First, it's not the easiest fruit to grow. Apples and pears took over because they were juicier and easier to eat. Second, modern diets shifted towards sweeter, more convenient fruits. Basically, quince got left behind. Quince is packed with fiber, antioxidants, and has a crazy good floral aroma when cooked. Plus, it's making a quiet comeback in gourmet kitchens. So, next time you see one at a farmer's market, grab it slow. Imagine biting into a tiny, deep purple berry that looks delicious but hits you with an intense sourness. Sounds unexpected, right? Well, that's exactly what people in medieval Europe enjoyed. Meet the sloe, a fruit that was once a staple in diets but has since faded into obscurity. Sloes come from the blackthorn bush, Prunus spinosa, and were a common sight in medieval hedgerows. Today, most people only know them as the key ingredient in sloe gin, but back in the day, they were a valuable wild food source. So why did our ancestors eat them, and why did they disappear from our plates? First off, let's talk taste. Sloes are incredibly tart. Medieval folks didn't just eat them raw. They fermented, dried, or cooked them into preserves, wines, and even medicinal remedies. The high tannin content made them useful for treating digestive issues, and they were often mixed with honey to soften their sharp bite. But here's the twist. Sloes weren't just food. Their thorny bushes were planted as natural fences, and their wood was even used for crafting tools and walking sticks. So why did we stop eating them? Well, as sweeter fruits like plums and cherries became more accessible, sloes took a back seat. So, next time you see a blackthorn bush, remember, you're looking at a medieval superfood that time forgot. Crabapple. Ah, the medieval feast, a time of roasted meats, hearty stews, and the forgotten fruit of the past? That's right, today we're talking about crabapples, the tart little powerhouses that medieval folks ate way before our modern, oversized apples took over. Unlike today's sweet apples, crabapples are tiny, sour, and often overlooked. But back in the Middle Ages, these little fruits were everywhere. Monks, peasants, and even nobles relied on them for food, medicine, and of course, alcohol. People didn't just eat them raw. Crabapples were boiled into preserves, turned into vinegar, and even fermented into a super tart cider. Think of it as medieval kombucha, probably stronger and definitely more rustic. And here's a fun fact. Crabapples weren't just food. Healers used them to treat stomach issues and even sore throats. Talk about a superfruit of the Middle Ages. Sadly, crabapples have faded into history, but maybe it's time for a comeback. Have you ever tasted one? Let us know in the comments. Rowan berry. Imagine you're a medieval peasant wandering through the woods, searching for food before winter sets in. You spot a tree covered in clusters of bright red berries, rowan berries. You know they're bitter, but you also know they could be the difference between survival and starvation. But what happened to them? Rowan berries, also known as mountain ash berries, were once a staple in medieval Europe. People used them in everything: wines, jellies, and even as a natural remedy. Their tartness made them perfect for fermentation, turning them into alcoholic drinks similar to cider or mead. But their real magic? Medicine. These little berries were packed with vitamin C, helping medieval folks fight off scurvy when fresh fruit was scarce. Monks and herbalists swore by rowan berries, using them to treat digestive issues and sore throats. Even the Vikings brewed rowan berry drinks for strength on long voyages. But today, they've almost vanished from our diet. So why did we forget them? Well, sugar and modern farming pushed aside these wild, slightly bitter fruits. But maybe it's time for a comeback. With their high antioxidants and immune-boosting properties, rowan berries could be the next superfood trend. Sea buckthorn. Did you know there's a fruit we used to eat in medieval times that's been almost completely forgotten? It's called sea buckthorn, and trust me, this little berry is a nutritional powerhouse that deserves a comeback. Sea buckthorn grows in tough conditions: rocky coastlines, mountains, high altitudes, even in freezing cold weather. That's why it was a staple food for medieval societies, especially in Europe and Asia. People back then didn't have vitamin supplements, so they relied on nature, and sea buckthorn was packed with everything they needed: vitamin C, antioxidants, and even omega-7, which is super rare in plants. Knights and warriors? Yeah, they were probably snacking on this stuff. It was known for its ability to boost energy, heal wounds, and keep the immune system strong. Basically a medieval superfood. Monks grew it in monastery gardens, and even Genghis Khan's army supposedly used it to stay in peak condition. So why did we stop eating it? Well, it's not exactly sweet. It's tart, almost like a mix of citrus and passion fruit. Plus, as trade routes expanded, we got access to easier to eat fruits like oranges and apples, pushing sea buckthorn into obscurity. But guess what? It's making a comeback. Health experts rave about it, and it's popping up in skincare, juices, and even cocktails. So, next time you see sea buckthorn, give it a try. You'll be tasting a piece of medieval history. Cornelian cherry. Ever heard of Cornelian cherry? No? Well, you're not alone. This tiny bright red fruit was once a staple in medieval diets, but has since faded into obscurity. But trust me, you're gonna want to hear about this. Back in the Middle Ages, Cornelian cherries were a prized fruit across Europe and the Middle East. Monks grew them in monastery gardens, and kings enjoyed them in lavish feasts. The fruit was used in jams, syrups, and even fermented into a type of wine. Romans and Greeks believed it had medicinal properties, using it to treat digestive issues and fevers. So, what happened? Well, as apples, plums, and cherries became more commercially viable, Cornelian cherry got left behind. It's slow growing, and its tart flavor isn't as instantly sweet as modern fruits. Over time, it became just another forgotten relic of the past. But here's the kicker. Cornelian cherries are actually a superfood, packed with antioxidants, vitamin C, and even anti-inflammatory properties. They rival some of today's most hyped health foods. Plus, they make amazing jams, liqueurs, and even desserts. Medoc. Imagine biting into a fruit so rich, so mysterious, that it once graced the tables of medieval feasts. But today, it's almost completely forgotten. This is the story of the medoc, a fruit lost to time. Back in the Middle Ages, fruit wasn't just a snack, it was a luxury. While apples, pears, and plums ruled the orchards, the medoc was something special. Described in old texts as a fruit of deep crimson with a taste both sweet and tart. It was a staple in royal courts and monastic gardens. But here's the catch. Medoc wasn't just eaten fresh. It was used in spiced wines, medicinal syrups, and even preserved for winter. Some say it had properties to warm the blood and strengthen the spirit, a true medieval superfood. So, what happened? As trade routes expanded and new fruits like citrus and tomatoes entered Europe, the medoc faded into obscurity. Records became sparse, and by the 18th century, it was practically erased from history. Could we bring medoc back? Some researchers believe wild relatives still exist, waiting to be rediscovered. History is full of forgotten flavors. Maybe it's time we tasted medoc once again. Jujube. Did you know there was a fruit that medieval folks used to love, but we barely talk about today? It's called the jujube. And no, I'm not talking about the candy. This little red fruit was once a staple in ancient diets, packed with nutrients and medicinal benefits. But somehow, it faded into obscurity. So, what happened? And why did our ancestors swear by it? Jujubes have been around for over 4,000 years, originating in China before spreading to Europe and the Middle East. By medieval times, they were a common snack, medicine, and even a sweet treat. People dried them, turned them into syrups, and even infused them in drinks. Think of them as the medieval energy bar, compact, nutritious, and long-lasting. So, why did jujubes disappear from our diet? Well, as trade routes expanded, newer and flashier fruits took the spotlight like apples and oranges. Plus, jujubes are delicate and not ideal for mass production. Over time, they were overshadowed, reduced to a niche fruit in herbal medicine. Jujubes are rich in antioxidants, vitamin C, and fiber. Basically a medieval superfood. They taste like a mix between dates and apples, perfect for snacks or teas. So maybe it's time for a comeback? Strawberry tree fruit. Did you know that medieval Europeans once snacked on a fruit that's almost forgotten today? The strawberry tree fruit. Yes, it's a real thing and was a staple in medieval diets, yet most people have never even heard of it. Imagine a bright red fruit, looking like a mix between a lychee and a raspberry, growing on an evergreen tree. It sounds exotic, but this fruit was commonly eaten centuries ago. So, what happened? Why did we stop eating it? The strawberry tree is native to the Mediterranean region and parts of Western Europe. It was well known in medieval times, often foraged by villagers or even cultivated in monastery gardens. Romans loved it too. Pliny the Elder even mentioned it in his writings. Now, let's talk about taste. The fruit is soft, slightly gritty, and has a mix of sweetness and bitterness. Fresh off the tree, it's not the most exciting snack, but medieval folks turned it into wine, jams, and even fermented drinks. tonics. Some even believed it had medicinal properties. So why did we forget about it? Simple modern fruits like apples and strawberries became more popular. Plus, strawberry tree fruit doesn't last long after picking, making it tough for markets. Could this medieval fruit make a comeback? Maybe. It's still growing in the wild, just waiting to be rediscovered. Let us know. Would you try it? Checkers.
For a checker tree with such big fruit. Here I found one which is already ripe. Soft and juicy.
Imagine biting into a fruit that our medieval ancestors once enjoyed. Yet today, almost no one even knows it exists. Meet the checkerberry, or simply checkers, a fruit that's been hiding in plain sight. Checkers grow on the wild service tree, a rare sight in modern landscapes. Back in the Middle Ages, though, this fruit was a seasonal treat, eaten fresh or dried, and even fermented into a type of beer. So, what did it taste like? Well, not great at first. When unripe, it's rock hard and astringent. But medieval folks knew the secret, letting it over-ripen, almost to the point of decay, and suddenly it turns sweet and soft, like a date or overripe pear. So why did we stop eating them? As farming evolved, apples and pears took over, and checkers faded into obscurity. But traces remain. Ever heard of the Checkers pub? Many were named after this fruit, a nod to its brewing history. Do you think checkers should be brought back? Let us know. Gooseberry.
Across a fruit tree that probably most of you have not seen before. This is a star gooseberry.
Long before supermarkets and processed snacks, our medieval ancestors had a secret fruit, one that's been nearly forgotten. Meet the gooseberry, a tiny tart powerhouse that once graced the tables of kings and peasants alike. Gooseberries were a staple in medieval Europe, thriving in cottage gardens and monastery orchards. These little green, red, or even golden berries were packed with vitamins and a tangy punch. They were used in everything: pies, stews, and even as medicine. Doctors of the time believed gooseberries could cool fevers and aid digestion, and they weren't wrong. Modern science confirms they're rich in vitamin C and antioxidants. Who knew medieval folks were onto something? Even royalty enjoyed gooseberries. They were often turned into sauces for roast meats, adding that perfect balance of sweet and tart. Talk about medieval fine dining. So why don't we eat them anymore? Industrial farming favored sweeter, easier to transport fruits, leaving gooseberries behind. But hey, maybe it's time for a comeback. Elderberry.
Today I want to share with you a very special herb to my heart. This is elderberry.
Elderberries, tiny, dark, and packed with history. Once a staple in medieval diets, these little berries have all but vanished from modern tables. But why? And what made them so popular back in the day? In medieval Europe, elderberries weren't just food, they were medicine. People brewed them into syrups, wines, and tonics, believing they could ward off colds, fevers, and even the plague. Rich in vitamins and antioxidants, these berries were nature's original immunity booster. Monks, herbalists, and even housewives swore by elderberries. They'd mash them into jams, dry them for winter, or mix them into mead for a touch of sweetness. But here's the catch. Raw elderberries, not so great. They're slightly toxic when uncooked. That's why medieval folk always boiled them into something delicious. Somehow, over time, we forgot about them. But elderberries are making a quiet comeback, popping up in herbal teas, supplements, and even craft cocktails. So, will elderberries make their grand return, or will they remain a forgotten relic of the past? Let us know what you think in the comments. Cloudberry.
Cloudberries, also known as Nordic berries, are one of the rarest and most sought-after fruits in the Northern Hemisphere.
Alright, picture this. You're a medieval peasant, or maybe even a noble, sitting at a grand feast. There's roasted boar, fresh bread, and right there, next to the honeyed mead, a golden orange berry you've probably never even heard of today, the cloudberry. This little fruit was a prized delicacy in medieval Europe and Scandinavia, packed with vitamin C and antioxidants. Back then, sailors even took cloudberries on long voyages to fight off scurvy, but somehow, over the centuries, this powerhouse of a berry just disappeared from most people's plates. Cloudberries thrived in the cold, boggy landscapes of the north. Think Scandinavia, Scotland, Russia. They weren't just food, they were medicine, survival rations, and even a luxury item traded by Vikings. Imagine paying for goods with a handful of berries. Wild, right? So why did we stop eating them? Well, they're notoriously hard to cultivate. They grow in remote wetlands, take years to fruit, and each plant needs both both male and female flowers. Talk about high maintenance. But hey, cloudberries are still out there. If you ever get the chance to try them, don't miss out. Who knows? Maybe it's time for a cloudberry comeback. Bilberry. Imagine you're a peasant in medieval Europe. You've spent the day toiling in the fields, your hands caked in dirt, your stomach growling. Then, you reach into your foraging pouch and pull out a handful of small, dark blue berries, the forgotten superfruit of the Middle Ages, the bilberry. Before blueberries became the trendy health food of today, bilberries were the real MVP. These tiny tart berries grew wild across Europe, especially in the dense forests of Scandinavia and the British Isles. They weren't just a tasty snack, they were medieval medicine. Bilberries were believed to help with everything from stomach issues to improving eyesight. In fact, legend has it that Wu pilots ate bilberry jam before night missions for better night vision, though science is still debating that one. In medieval times, people baked bilberries into pies, used them to dye fabrics, and even made crude wines from them. But as farming changed, bilberries faded into obscurity, overshadowed by their American cousin, the blueberry. But hey, maybe it's time for a comeback? If you ever get the chance, try some bilberries. After all, if they were good enough for medieval peasants, they're good enough for us. Myrtle berry.
So today I'm going to talk about myrtleberry. They look a little bit like a blueberry that you stretched out a bit.
Ever heard of a fruit so rare that it's basically been wiped from our modern diets? Meet the myrtleberry, a tiny deep blue fruit that was once a staple in medieval kitchens, but has since been almost completely forgotten. But why did we stop eating it? And what made it so popular back in the day? Well, let's take a trip back in time. During the Middle Ages, myrtleberries were everywhere, used in cooking, medicine, and even as a natural sweetener. These little berries come from the myrtle plant, an evergreen shrub native to the Mediterranean. Their flavor? Think a mix of juniper, rosemary, and a hint of blueberry, sweet yet slightly spicy, perfect for flavoring everything from roasted meats to medieval wines. They were crushed into sauces, infused into liquors, and even used in herbal remedies. People believed myrtle berries could aid digestion, freshen breath, and even act as an aphrodisiac. Yep, medieval folks were all about those natural remedies. So why don't we eat them anymore? Well, with the rise of sugarcane and more accessible fruits, myrtle berries got pushed aside. They're also tricky to cultivate commercially, making them a rarity today. But hey, maybe it's time for a comeback. Would you try myrtle berries if they made their way back to store shelves? Let me know in the comments. Hackberry.
This, my friends, is a very tiny little fruit known as a hackberry.
Alright, picture this. You're walking through a medieval village, past thatched roof cottages, the smell of fresh bread in the air. You stop at a market stall, and instead of apples or pears, you grab a handful of hackberries? Yeah, hackberries. A fruit so forgotten today that most people wouldn't even recognize them. But back in medieval times, these little guys were a legit snack, packed with energy and nutrients. So, what exactly is a hackberry? Well, it comes from the Celtis genus, a group of trees found all over Europe, Asia, and North America. These trees drop small, dark purple berries that look kind of like tiny cherries. But here's the kicker. Hackberries aren't juicy like a modern berry. They have a crunchy, nut-like texture with a sweet date-like taste. Medieval folks knew what was up. They ate hackberries raw, ground them into meals, or even turned them into energy-dense food balls, kind of like medieval protein bars. Native Americans did the same. These berries were full of carbs, fat, and protein, basically survival food before granola bars were a thing. So why did we stop eating them? Probably because farming took over, and bigger, juicier fruits became more popular. But the hackberry, it's still out there, growing wild, waiting for someone to rediscover it. So next time you're on a hike and spot one, maybe give it a try, you'd be snacking like a medieval peasant, or maybe a king. Dog rose hip. Here's something you might not have thought about. The dog rose hip. Yep, that little red fruit that grows on wild rose bushes is one of the forgotten superfoods of medieval times. Back then, people didn't just see roses as pretty flowers. They saw food, medicine, and survival. Dog rose hips were a staple in medieval diets, especially in times when other fruits were scarce. They're packed with vitamin C, so much so that during World War II, people gathered them to make syrup when citrus fruits were hard to come by. But long before that, medieval folks were turning them into everything from jams and syrups to wines and teas. Monks in monasteries, they were brewing rosehip concoctions for healing, believing they could ward off colds, aid digestion, and even boost the immune system. Imagine being a peasant in the 1300s. Winter's coming, and there's no way you're getting fresh apples or berries. But those bright red rose hips, they're still clinging to the branches, waiting to be plucked. Dried, mashed, or boiled, they were an essential part of survival. So why did we forget about them? As sugar and imported fruits became more common, people moved away from foraging and simple, nutrient-dense foods. But with today's interest in wild foods and medieval traditions, maybe it's time for a dog rose hip comeback. Next time you're walking past a wild rose bush, take a closer look. That tiny fruit might just be a forgotten piece of history waiting to be rediscovered. Dewberry.
I was doing a little scout down the edge of this field line, and I was paying real close attention to the trees and the plants, and I came across a wild edible called dewberry.
Alright, picture this. You're strolling through a medieval village, the scent of fresh bread in the air, maybe dodging a chamber pot being emptied from a window. Life is rough, but one thing you would have had that we don't really think about today, dewberries. Yeah, these little guys were once a staple in medieval diets, and yet they've practically disappeared from modern fruit bowls. So, what are dewberries? Imagine a blackberry, but lower to the ground, trailing on vines instead of growing in tall bushes. They're dark, juicy, and packed with flavor. Think blackberries, but a little more tart and complex. Back in medieval times, people foraged them in the wild, using them in everything from pies to medicinal syrups. And let's be real, if you lived in an age before grocery stores, you needed every source of vitamins you could get. Herbalists swore by dewberries too. They weren't just snacks, they were believed to help with fevers, stomach issues, even infections. Some medieval recipes mixed them with honey and mead for drinks that were both tasty and a little boozy. So why don't we eat them anymore? Well, they're harder to harvest than their blackberry cousins, and modern farming just kind of forgot about them. But hey, next time you're out in the wild and spot a low-growing bramble with dark purple berries, maybe give it a try. Who knows? You might just rediscover a taste of the medieval past. Mayhaw. Imagine wandering through a medieval village market, bustling traders, the scent of fresh bread in the air, and baskets overflowing with fruits you've probably never heard of. One of those, the mayhaw. Now, unless you're from the deep south, you're probably thinking, May what? But back in the day, like way back in medieval times, mayhaws were a seasonal delicacy, treasured for their tart apple-like flavor. These tiny reddish berries grew in swampy lowlands and were a staple in jams, jellies, and even fermented into wines and meads. Think of it as a medieval fruit punch, but with a kick. Mayhaws were particularly popular in regions with wet, temperate climates, where they thrived naturally. Monks and herbalists prized them for their medicinal benefits, using them to treat ailments ranging from indigestion to heart issues. Some even believed mayhaw syrup had near magical healing properties, sort of like the elderberry of its time. So why don't we hear about them anymore? Simple. As agriculture evolved, more commercially viable fruits like apples and cherries took over. Mayhaws, which were harder to cultivate on a large scale, slowly faded into obscurity. But here's the twist. Mayhaws are still around. In the southern US, especially Louisiana and Texas, local foragers and farmers are keeping the tradition alive. Maybe it's time for a comeback. So next time you're looking for an ancient fruit experience, track down some mayhaw jelly. Your medieval ancestors would totally approve. Winter cherry. The winter cherry, also known as Physalis alcakengi or the Chinese lantern plant, was once a common sight in medieval Europe. Valued for its bright orange husk and tart, slightly sweet flavor, this fruit was widely consumed, yet it has since faded into obscurity. Today, it is often grown for ornamental purposes rather than as a food source. During the Middle Ages, the winter cherry was cherished for both its culinary and medicinal uses. Rich in vitamin C, it was a useful remedy against scurvy, particularly during the colder months when fresh produce was scarce. Apothecaries used the fruit to treat ailments like kidney stones, gout, and fevers. Its diuretic properties made it a popular natural remedy for cleansing the body. Culinary-wise, medieval cooks incorporated winter cherries into jams, syrups, and even savory dishes. Their tartness added complexity to sauces served alongside roasted meats. Monasteries, known for their knowledge of plants and herbs, often cultivated winter cherries in their gardens for both nourishment and healing. Over time, the fruit fell out of favor due to changing tastes and the rise of more easily cultivated crops. Today, its close relative, the Cape gooseberry, is more widely recognized, while the winter cherry lingers mostly as a forgotten relic of the past. With modern interest in medieval cuisine and forgotten foods growing, the winter cherry may yet make a comeback. Its unique taste, vibrant appearance, and historical significance could once again earn it a place in our kitchens. Black mulberry. Imagine you're in medieval Europe. The table before you is filled with roasted meats, fresh bread, and a dark, juicy fruit that stains your fingers purple. That fruit, the black mulberry. What was once a prized delicacy is now mostly forgotten. Black mulberries were cherished from the Byzantine Empire to Tudor England. Originating from Persia, they traveled through trade routes, making their way into medieval gardens and royal orchards. These berries weren't just tasty, they were packed with nutrients. Rich in antioxidants, they were believed to purify the blood and even slow aging. In medieval medicine, they treated fevers, sore throats, and digestive issues. fruits. Monks and apothecaries turned them into syrups, wines, and jams. Black mulberry wine was a favorite among nobility, while common folk enjoyed the fresh fruit in pies and tarts. But over time, black mulberries faded from our tables. They're delicate, hard to transport, and were overshadowed by easier-to-grow fruits like apples and berries. Perhaps it's time to rediscover this medieval gem. So, next time you spot a black mulberry tree, remember, you are tasting history. So, there you have it. 25 incredible fruits that once graced medieval tables, but have since faded into obscurity. Some were lost to changing tastes, others to industrial farming, and a few simply couldn't keep up with the modern world. But just imagine the flavors we're missing out on. Tart medlars, honey-sweet mulberries, and even the legendary sorb apple that had to be eaten raw. It's crazy to think that what was once common in markets and castles is now almost unknown. But here's the good news. Many of these fruits are still out there, waiting to be rediscovered. Some small farms and foragers are bringing them back, and with the rise of heirloom gardening, who knows? Maybe in a few years, you'll be snacking on a fresh service berry or making jam from Cornelian cherries. If you found this interesting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten flavors. And let us know in the comments, which of these fruits would you try first? Or better yet, have you actually tasted any of them? Let's bring these medieval treats back into the spotlight. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.